Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves come back from 18 down, but lose to the Houston Rockets in overtime. We'll talk about Rob Dillingham's breakout. We'll talk about Anthony Edwards' effort down the stretch, and some of the rotation questions we got to address here. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Robinhood Gold. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. Happy Thanksgiving Eve here in the U.S. Timberwolves play again tonight at home against Sacramento. And it seems silly to talk about must wins the week of Thanksgiving, but hey, the Wolves are a game under 500 now. And they've lost 3 in a row for the second time already this season. They only lost 3 in a row. Actually, let me rephrase that. They didn't lose 3 in a row at all last year in the regular season, not until the second round of the playoffs. And then, of course, they lost 3 in a row to Denver. Then they lost 3 in a row to Dallas. But not at all in the regular season. They've already done it twice, and they've lost 6 of their last 8. So tonight against the Kings is, needless to say, very important. Today, it's the post-game pod from the loss to the Rockets on Tuesday. And there's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to start with kind of a quick hit, like game flow, quick takeaways, and then we'll get into the rotation stuff. And there's a lot to talk about here between Dillingham and Naz Reid and, who didn't play enough down the stretch. And some of those questions that I think are absolutely fair. But there's always so many factors when it comes to substitution patterns and rotation decisions. And so I want to get into a lot of that here. And then we'll close, as we always do on the postgame pod, with individual studs and duds. So we'll do all that here in just a moment. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder about the Locked On Wolves newsletter. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Introducing the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free right now on LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. All right. Let's dive into this. So the headline, of course, is that the Timberwolves again trailed by a billion points, actually 18 points. And again, they needed a furious second half comeback in order to make it a close game. They actually had a real shot to win at the end of regulation. And Anthony Edwards had a floater that rimmed out. I feel like he could have gotten all the way to the rim. But anyway, the shot easily could have gone down for Naz. And we have a second consecutive heartbreak loss for the Wolves, as ultimately then in overtime, we'll talk about this, but they scored the first 3 in overtime. And then there's no semblance of offensive structure for Minnesota. And the defense completely falls apart, despite making substitutions that are supposed to help their defense. And they gave up, a big run in overtime. They end up losing by 6. So the overall, I guess, blueprint of how this game turned out, it was the same. We'll call it a script, the same script. Slow start for Minnesota. The other team simply plays harder. And it felt a little like the start to the Celtics game, which that was really more just Jaylen Brown going nuts. But the Wolves have played 17 games this year, and maybe a dozen of them have started this exact same way, where the Wolves just kind of come out like they just roll the ball out, let's play, like it's a pickup game. And the other team is like, oh, this team went to the conference finals, we're going to give it our best. And specifically in the case of the Rockets always play hard. And that's one of their calling cards. It's why they're the top 3 defense in the league. It's why they're now 13-6, because they play hard like the Wolves did last year. And the Wolves are, for the most part, still playing like, hey, the conference final conference finals are owed to us again. We'll get back there. We just got to see if we can get to the finals and win the whole thing, right? Like, that's how they're playing. They're playing like the work in between doesn't matter. And obviously that's not a recipe for success at the NBA level. And we saw that again in this game. Houston came out and played hard. The Wolves didn't. It's that simple. And now they put themselves behind the 8 ball very quickly. Start of this game, Houston goes up 6-0. It's still an 11-5 lead. Then it's 18-9. Then it's 20-11. Then it's 22-11. It keeps building and building and building. The Wolves ultimately push back a little at the end of the quarter, but then in the second quarter, the Rockets build a bit of a lead again, and that's when the Boo Birds start to come out at target center. And I think it's the first time this year that's happened. And it happened a couple times when Chris Finch called timeouts to stop the play. Actually, no, I think it was third quarter when the Boo Birds really came out. And there was one timeout where it was loud. Like, it was clear displeasure with how the home team was playing, and understandably so. But again, back to the script thing. Same thing. Slow start, other team plays harder. The Wolves kind of hang in because they make enough threes. And ultimately, then it comes down to this big second half comeback that the Wolves have to have. And in this case, we'll talk a lot about Rob Dillingham. He's a massive part of it. Naz Reid's a big part of it. He finally gets on track. But then when it's a close game, it's execution down the stretch, which are things that 2 years ago, year one of Rudy Gobert, the year when Cat missed a bunch of games, late game execution was a major problem, as was losing to bad teams. Last year, neither of those things were recurring issues. Of course, they happened at times over the course of 82 games, but the Wolves, for the most part, beat bad teams. I'm not saying Houston's a bad team, but obviously over the last couple of weeks, that has been an issue. They beat bad teams, and they executed well at the end of games. Now, I will say, I think overall, other than a couple possessions mixed in that we'll talk about that were very Julius Randle-centric possessions, the ball movement was okay. They generated some decent shots. They just missed them. Anthony Edwards, I don't think, made a shot in fourth quarter and overtime, and I thought he played well. I actually thought he made good decisions. He just didn't make the shots. Like, there was maybe 1-3 that was a little bit forced. I think it was when they were down 2, and he was trying to, get that massive, like, split open target center, and one of those moments, and he just missed, and it wasn't a great shot. But he missed the floater that rimmed out. Jaden McDaniels, we'll talk more about his game. He had a brutal game, and he had multiple threes, including one when they were up, I think 5 with like a couple of minutes left that was halfway down and rimmed out from the corner. But he also just missed some other open threes. They were generating decent shots for a lot of this. They were just missing them. Now, there were a couple clunky possessions in there, but, I mean, look at what Houston did. Houston's offense at the end of the fourth quarter was brutal. It was worse than the Wolves. They had no semblance to what they were doing. They were just essentially jacking 30-footers. And, Şengün was, like, trying to shoot over Rudy, and, like, at that, that ship had sailed. He'd done that a little bit in the third quarter when they built their lead. But, like, it just was very clunky. Like, it was classic late game, like, iso ball on both ends. So the Wolves were not the only team to blame there. And overall, again, I feel like they generated some decent shots during that stretch. They just missed them. That said, they still didn't execute because they didn't win this game. And they fell apart in overtime. So again, same script, slow start, other team plays harder. You hang in with enough three-pointers made, and Ant does enough stuff along the way. In this case, you have Rob Dillingham help you with this big second half comeback. And then the late game execution's bad. And then we get into some of the questions about the rotation and certainly the execution in overtime. And that's what I want to focus on for the next chunk of the show, is talk about the rotation and specifically a couple of the bench guys, Rob Dillingham, Naz Reid, and how they were treated in the second half of this game, how their minutes were handled, and whether or not Chris Finch should have done that differently. And the short answer is yes. I'll explain why. And also why it doesn't mean Chris Finch is a bad coach. So we'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply for product-specific disclosures. Visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Of course, Thanksgiving is tomorrow, and it's just such a fun time for football. It's too bad we're going to have a couple clunkers of games, I'm guessing, early on. Bears at Lions. Lions are favored by 10.5 points, which is still an aggressive line. I don't actually think I would take that if I wouldn't take the Lions with the points. Or the Lions at minus 10.5. I think I would maybe take the Bears with the points. I would actually maybe look at the over-under on that game. I don't know. It's 48.5. The Cowboys are 3.5-point favorites against the Giants. Neither of those teams are good. But then Packers-Dolphins Thursday night will be a good one. Dolphins at Packers. Packers favored by 3.5. Miami dealing with the cold. Obviously everybody dealing with a short week. That'll be an interesting one. Tua is back, so that should be a good game. But head on over to FanDuel to check out those lines for Thanksgiving. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk rotation. That is the hot topic coming out of this one. So let's start with when Rob Dillingham. So Rob Dillingham did get first half minutes. He did play rotation minutes early in this game. And then in the third quarter, he entered the game at the 4:37 mark, I believe. Yeah, the 4:37 mark, with the Wolves trailing by 16. Let me make sure I got that right. I believe they were down 16 when he entered the game. Yeah, they were down 16 at the 4:37 mark, okay? They trailed by as many as 18. It was a 16-point deficit. Dillingham comes in the game. And actually, after he entered the game, the Rockets made the first bucket. So that's when it ballooned to 18. Dillingham came in and missed a three-pointer immediately. Brooks hits a shot, and it's a 16-point game. Then Dillingham misses another three. But don't worry, he's on the floor to just keep shooting. Eventually, they go on a 14-4 run from the time he enters the game. And the Wolves are now down by, I believe, 10. Is that right? Head into the fourth quarter. Okay. He plays the entire fourth quarter until the final 28 seconds, and he leaves prior to a defensive possession. And I thought Chris Finch taking him out when he did made sense, given the time of. So let's see. There's 28.1 seconds left, and it was actually right after he had made his turnover with them up 2, and Amen Thompson scores on the other end. It's now a tie game. Gobert gets called for an offensive foul when he tries to hook Şengün to allow Dillingham to score. So 28 seconds left. The ball's going back to Houston, a tie game, and Finch takes out Dillingham for Alexander Walker. That makes a ton of sense. That's defense for offense, right? That's a very normal end of game substitution. Gobert comes up with a clutch block against Şengün, which of course now nobody's going to talk about. It's beside the point. The Wolves lost the game. I get it. But a clutch block from Rudy, swatting Şengün's shot attempt with 15 seconds left. Wolves get the rebound, and they don't have any timeouts, right? Which, by the way, I need to point this out. That's why the Timberwolves didn't challenge the offensive foul call against Julius Randle with like a minute left. Everybody, including Jim Pete and Grady, were confused by why the Wolves didn't challenge. They didn't have any timeouts. They couldn't challenge. They had to use them all in the third quarter and early fourth quarter when they were trying to get back into the game. And so that's why they didn't challenge the Randle charge, which they probably would have won. So anyway, with 15 seconds left, no timeouts. So that's why Dillingham's not in the game for the last possession, of course. Ant misses his floater that easily could have gone down. I thought Ant handled himself pretty well in that possession. I thought for sure he was going to take a three. It was a tie game. Obviously, didn't need to do that. Got into the paint and scored, or should have scored, but the ball rims out. So then Dillingham sits the entire overtime. I thought maybe there was a chance that Chris Finch would come back with some of the guys that got him there. But Dillingham sits the whole overtime, doesn't come back in until the 54-second mark with them already down 8. And they just need offense. They got to within 4, but then ultimately lose by 6. So those are the Dillingham minutes. Okay. Now let's talk Naz Reid, and then we'll get back to Dillingham too. Naz Reid left with, like, of course, he played most of the third quarter, was part of a similar run to what Dillingham was part of. And by the way, Naz had been struggling so much the last few games, especially with this three-point shot. Started to click a little bit in this game. So Minnesota's down 5 when Naz leaves the game with 8:23 left in the fourth quarter. He does not come back in the game until 53 seconds left in overtime. At the same time, Dillingham comes in with the Wolves down 8 and desperately needing offense. So he wasn't hurt, right? He came back in the game with the last minute of overtime when their fate was all but sealed. But he didn't play the last 8 minutes of regulation at all. Now, Rudy Gobert, other than a stretch early in the game defensively, I thought was very good in this game, and they needed him on the floor to deal with Şengün, to protect the paint. He did an awesome job during that comeback in the third quarter. So I'm not advocating for less Rudy minutes. Julius Randle had some moments, but Julius Randle was the problem when it came to the Timberwolves offense down the stretch. And Chris Finch acknowledged post-game to the media that if he could do it over, he would have had Naz Reid back in the game in the fourth quarter at some point. Now, I don't think he said for who, but I mentioned this in the first segment today, that I thought the Wolves' offensive ball movement at times was actually pretty good, even down the stretch. I thought they were generating decent shots. When they weren't is when the ball got to Randle, and it was, you knew he wasn't going to pass it. And one of the qualities of Julius Randle's game that's a positive thing when he came over from the Knicks that I talked about was he's a better passer than Karl-Anthony Towns. He is. He like the ceiling of Karl-Anthony Towns passes, he may wow you every now and again, but he also makes some really terrible passes. Julius Randle is a more consistent passer, less turnovers when he's passing the basketball, the less turnovers, period, and just a supposedly a better, more willing passer. He has not proven to be a more willing passer than Karl-Anthony Towns in his admittedly short amount of time in Minnesota, 17 games to this point. Randle did not pass very often in this game. He had a couple of forced passes in the paint in close quarters that led to turnovers. I know he finished with 3 assists. He also had 3 turnovers. He had the charge, which maybe shouldn't have been a charge in the final minute. I thought it was should have been a blocking foul. But he had a couple of passes he kind of rifled in the paint in close quarters to Rudy and others. He had some other passes he should have made and didn't make, but he was put his head down and go mode. And in my mind, like, there's clear benefits to having Randle on the floor with Anthony Edwards, in the sense where, like, if they put 2 on the ball, which Houston started to do in the second half, and did an awesome job of forcing the ball out of his hands and forcing a lot of misses from Ant. Again, he didn't make a field goal in the fourth quarter in overtime. And he started, I think, 3 of 4 from 3. He finished 3 of 12 from 3. They did a great job with that. And so, in theory, if Randle's one pass away, he can catch and go and catch the Rockets in rotation, in a defensive rotation, and Randle can beat whoever is rotating to guard him, can beat a mismatch. He certainly had some possessions where he bullied Dylan Brooks in this game, and that's the plan in theory. But if Randle's not one pass away, or if Randle's not decisive enough, and the Rockets have a chance to load up, they know this dude's not passing the basketball. He's going to put his head down and go to the basket, and there you get the charge in the late fourth quarter. You get some turnovers when they collapse on him, and he tries to pass it at the last second. Or you just get a tough shot, which, like, Randle is really good at making tough twos in the paint. Like, that's what he's best at. But they're not always going to go down, and it's not always, even when he makes it, the best shot the Wolves could get on a given possession. The advantage to having Naz in the game instead of Randle is he's a true spot-up threat. And he started making threes again in this game. And so if Naz is a pass or 2 away, he can catch and shoot, quick release. He's going to be decisive. That's the thing with Naz Reid. I actually think he's more decisive than Julius Randle. Like, when Naz wants to shoot a 3, it's gone. Or he'll pump fake and go, and he'll dunk on somebody. Naz wants to dunk on somebody. He wants to get all the way to the paint. Naz isn't shooting a tough 2 in the paint. And that's the advantage to Naz Reid's game. And I think that pairing with Ant late in the game, when they're putting 2 on the ball, it makes more sense to have the more dynamic 3-point shooter who can also put the basketball on the floor. But again, the most important thing is his decisiveness. And I'm not even talking about defense. Let's talk about defense. So let me explain why I was okay with the Dillingham sub. In the moment when he subbed out, it made a ton of sense. Tie game, 28 seconds, defensive possession. Put Alexander Walker on the floor. Yes, 10 times out of 10. Okay. But down the stretch in the fourth quarter, when the Wolves got that 5-point lead and the Rockets offense was discombobulated, they just started going to pick and roll, and Dillingham was really struggling to get through some of those screens. And it's something he's got to get better at. And it's something that, like, say, Jordan McLaughlin, who's another diminutive point guard in recent Timberwolves history, he got very good at getting through screens, but it still sometimes was an issue. It's one of the reasons he can't play more at the NBA level, is because if he gets completely wiped out by screens, he's out of the play. And that's what was happening. He hasn't quite figured out, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is arguably the best player in the entire NBA at navigating screens, at just getting skinny and getting through them. And occasionally gets called for a foul. But by and large, it's the effort level of getting through a screen that's so important. And that's why Finch didn't go back to Dillingham. And yeah, Dillingham's the better offensive player. He's the better, obviously, pure scorer than Alexander-Walker. But the offense wasn't the problem in overtime. And they still generated open looks that Jaden McDaniels went 1 for 8 on. Every single one of Jaden McDaniels' shot attempts from outside the arc were wide open. He attempted 16 shots in this game because the Rockets were making him shoot the ball 16 times. Rob Dillingham doesn't solve that problem by being on the floor, and he gives back more defensively in a negative way against a team like Houston. So that's why the substitution was made. It does not take away from what Rob Dillingham did to get the Wolves where they were. And we'll talk more about that. We'll talk about his box score line and how crazy it was here in just a moment. But I understand that sub. What I don't understand is the Naz Reid not going back to Naz. And the second piece of that is also the defense. I actually thought Naz was much better defensively than Julius Randle in this game. I'm not saying overall that's always the case, because Naz has games where he really struggles defensively, but Julius Randle struggled to be appropriately physical defensively. He had some good possessions when he guarded Şengün where he had some where he was too physical. He ended up with 5 fouls in this game. But overall, Naz Reid's awareness and his activity level and his length are superior to Julius Randle's on defense. And that was super evident in this game. So if you're going to make the defensive sub of putting Alexander-Walker in for Rob Dillingham, why not go all the way and improve your defense by putting Naz Reid in for Julius Randle? And with that substitution, you now gain the additional floor spacing, the three-point shooting threat on the offensive end of the floor. I thought that was a big miss. And credit to Chris Finch. Some people don't like when Chris Finch admits when he makes mistakes or he wishes he would have done something different in the post-game presser. I don't understand that. That's the correct thing to do as a coach, is admit your mistake and to be humble about it. It doesn't mean he's a bad coach. It means he made a mistake, and he, instead of saying, doing the Bill Belichick, well, I did what I did or whatever. Like, I don't have any problem with Chris Finch admitting that. I wish he would have put Naz in the game, but at least he knew in like immediately afterward, hey, I messed this up. And, credit to him for leaving Dillingham on the floor for the entire fourth quarter. By the way, nobody's talking about, like, dude was gassed too. Like, he'd played for 16, 18 consecutive game minutes. And I would have probably gone back to Dillingham at some point in overtime, like when you're down by a bucket or two, instead of waiting until you're down 8 with 50 seconds left. But Dillingham was also gassed when he left the game in the fourth quarter. All right, let's close the podcast today with individual studs and duds. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Built. PSA for anybody who rents out there. If you haven't heard of Built, you're about to thank me. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Built. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use toward flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. Let me break it down for you. There's no cost to join Built. And as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. Those are over 500 airlines you can use through Built Points, and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Built Points toward. Points can also be redeemed toward a future rent payment and unique experiences that only Built members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt, JOINBILT.com/LockedOnNBA. Make sure to use our URL so they know that we sent you. Again, joinbuilt.com, JOINBILT.com/LockedOnNBA to start earning points on your rent payments today. All right, let's close with individual studs and duds here. Rob Dillingham, it was great. I know I talked about the defensive issues, but like, hey, that's not a problem. Like, we're not talking about that if he doesn't help get them back into the game. And I mentioned this on Twitter at some point. Part of the other thing real quickly with them going away from Dillingham late is when you're down 18 and you're like, hey, rookie, go get us some buckets. That's different than, hey, this is for lack of a better term, nut crunch time at the end of the fourth quarter. We're up a bucket, down a bucket, tie game. It's just a little bit different. I'm not saying like he was too nervous to be out there or any of that, but like we saw the turnover in transition, he just lost the ball with 30 seconds left. Like, it's just a different vibe. It's a different vibe than down 18 in the third quarter. And I'm sure that factored into the decision too. And I generally don't agree with it with like, let's not play the rookie because he's a rookie. But when you're factoring in, he's also played 18 straight game minutes and, he hasn't played that much yet this season. All the other factors that match up issues defensively, like I understand subbing him out. That said, he was phenomenal getting the Wolves back into this game. And I say this all the time, individual game plus minus for individual players can be super misleading. But Rob Dillingham was a plus 26 in this game. There was not another Timberwolves player that was better than a plus 6. I hardly know how that's possible. Like, think about it. It's crazy. The Wolves only had 3 guys that had positive plus minus. It was the 4 guys, the 3 bench guys and Rudy Gobert. Dillingham was a plus 26. Naz was a plus 6. Rudy was a plus 4, and Alexander Walker was a plus 2. That illustrates just how impactful Rob Dillingham was, especially in the third quarter of this game. He had 12 points on 13 shots, so not ultra efficient. He didn't get to the line. He did miss a couple shots in the paint. I think he only had 1 shot blocked, so it's not like he was having issues with that frequently. But 5 of 13 shooting, 2 of 5 on threes. Hit a really big one when the Wolves were getting back into the game in the fourth quarter. 7 assists, 5 rebounds, which is crazy. He had 1 that was a really impressive, just compete for the basketball rebound. I mean, like, he had more rebounds, DiVincenzo ended up actually playing the least minutes on the team at 21. He only had 1 rebound. Alexander Walker only had 2 rebounds in 30 minutes. Rob Dillingham had 5 rebounds in 24 minutes. Dude's like barely 6'1", 160 pounds soaking wet. 7 assists, 3 turnovers for Dillingham. Again, some of the decision-making, some of the actual execution, shaky, but this is only his second game playing actual rotation minutes. So I'm not at all, this isn't an indictment on Rob Dillingham as a player, who he's going to be or any of that stuff. It's just the reality of he's a young player that hasn't played much. And I said this the other day on the show, we don't know if he would have played this well if he played opening night. The NFL quarterback sitting for a year thing isn't a perfect analogy, but it's an example of hey, if Jordan Love plays when he's 21, is he as good as he is now? I don't know. Probably not. Right. So we don't know. And I don't have a problem with how Chris Finch has played that to this point. I do. This is another conversation that I have had on the show. We'll have another time again. I think the rotation should expand. I think it should be at least 8 guys, or at least 9 guys, and more guys should be getting into the mix than how Finch has handled it to this point. But I don't necessarily disagree with how he's handled Rob Dillingham. Naz Reid's also a stud in this game. 19.7 rebounds, 7 of 14 shooting, 3 of 7 on threes, couple of steals for Naz, just 2 turnovers in 27 minutes. Good to see him get back into the mix and find his confidence offensively. There's that one possession where Ant drew 2 kind of elbow extended on the free throw line, extended on the right side of the floor, and swung it to, I actually think it was Dillingham, who then swung it to Naz, who pump faked the 3, drove and had a nice double clutch dunk, drove baseline and had a double clutch dunk. And then after that, he hit a 3 immediately, then a couple possessions later. And it just felt like Naz was back after having a rough last few games. So it was good to see Naz put up a 19 and 7 with a couple steals. So really strong game from Naz. My third stud, it's still going to be Ant. I know he struggled in the fourth quarter and overtime, but again, I said this earlier, I thought his process was good. I thought he just missed a couple shots he normally makes. 29 points on 22 shots, not efficient from the field, 5 of 10 on 2s, 3 of 12 on 3s. But he got to the line 10 times, which was great to see. A perfect 10 of 10 at the line, which was also great to see for as bad as he was struggling with free throws, just a few weeks ago. 10 rebounds in this game for Anthony Edwards. He only had 1 assist, but he had a steal. He had 3 blocks in this game too. I actually thought this was a good Anthony Edwards game. Sometimes the shots don't fall. It doesn't mean he played poorly. And I thought his shot selection was pretty good. Duds, we got to go with Dante. He struggled again, missed all 4 of his 3-point attempts. He started for the second straight game. 3 points on 5 shots for Dante DiVincenzo. 0 of 4 outside the arc, 1 of 5 overall, 3 assists, but also 3 turnovers in this game. And then Jaden McDaniels. I thought Jaden was okay defensively, not quite to his standards, which we've said a lot this year. And he only had 9 points on 16 shots in this game. Had a lot of those weird kind of mid-range, 10, 12 foot floater type shots he shoots. The like fadeaway floaters where he's like perpendicular to the like he's basically like, no, that's not what I say. Parallel to the ground where he's like laying back and shooting the weird little fadeaway fall away thing, which he makes sometimes, but not enough to justify it to the extent that he shoots it. So 9 points on 16 shots, 1 of 8 on threes. We talked about all those misses on open threes, and that's become a real problem. I mean, the MO right now against the Wolves is like, hey, let's let this dude shoot. And that's what opposing teams are doing. All right. That's all in this one. The Wolves play again tonight. They have Sacramento. Of course, I should mention the Wolves are out of the NBA Cup competition now. The Rockets have won the group. The Wolves are out. They've got one more game this Saturday or Friday for the in terms of the NBA Cup, but it doesn't matter for that for the actual cup. So Sacramento tonight. Of course, the Wolves have beaten Sacramento twice this season. A couple of close games in Sacramento by a bucket, the second game of the year, and then that fun overtime game that broke the last 3-game losing streak. And now here they go again, playing Sacramento on a 3-game losing streak. We know the Kings are a tough matchup, and were last year too for Minnesota. So it's going to be tough to beat them a third time, but it really feels like the Wolves have to win this game. They can't go into, Friday against the Clippers. This next stretch of Clippers, Lakers, Clippers, Warriors, Knicks, Warriors is brutal. They've got to win they got to win 2 out of 3 here, these next 3 home games, so they can at least be 500 or above headed into this stretch. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can always listen wherever you get podcasts. You can watch on YouTube or on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. You can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder, you can also subscribe to the newsletter on LockedOnDaily.com. And you'll get that newsletter daily. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.